Number 10. Carnage, Earth 7642. This alternate version of Carnage comes to us from the Spider-Man and Batman team-up comic. He hails from Earth 7642, an alternate Earth where New York City's Spidey and his foes and Gotham City's Batman and his foes both coexist. Carnage in this reality was cured of his insanity, violent and homicidal tendencies by being implanted with an inhibitor chip. However, this chip was disabled by his symbiote, returning him to normal. Escaping captivity, he managed to successfully kidnap Joker, who also had an inhibitor chip, keeping him sane. Cletus disabled Joker's chip and proposed a team up, but the two villains unfortunately couldn't agree on a method when it came to how to terrorize. Joker wanted something more elaborate in a scheme, whereas Carnage just wanted, well, carnage. In the end, Carnage was defeated in an interesting turn of events by the uncoordinated efforts of both Joker and Batman. Number 9. Carnage, Earth 311. Carnage of Earth 311 was known by the name Cletus Kasady. He claimed to be possessed not by a symbiote but by what he referred to as a demon. Earth 311 is the reality belonging to Marvel's 1602 universe created by Neil Gaiman. This alternate version of Carnage, however, was not a creation of Mr. Gaiman himself, but instead was created by Mike Costa and David Baldione, making his first appearance as a side character in one of the stories included in 2015's The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 1. In fact, I think that's his only appearance thus far. He was the leader of the Sinister Sextet, who were admittedly pretty handily defeated by the Web Warriors in said story. However, it should be noted that the Sinister Sextet therefore went up against not one Spider-Man, woman, or totem, but instead 5 of them. Number 8. Carnage, Earth 1610. Carnage in the Ultimate Universe has no attachment to its usual host Cletus Kasady. The symbiote is not alien in origin, but instead, like Venom in this universe, was created in a lab. The creature was made out of samples left over from Richard Parker's experiments, combined with Peter's unique DNA. Carnage, when unleashed, would end up being a monster who ultimately killed Gwen Stacy due to it possessing fragments of Peter's memories. It needs to consume humans in order to survive in the beginning, but otherwise had powers similar to its 616 counterpart. It could shapeshift and was considered to be immensely strong. However, it also possesses a unique ability as well. It was able in essence to recreate the deceased Gwen Stacy, producing a clone of her. This clone was permanently bonded to the symbiote and herself would become known as Carnage. The only downside as well was that as clone Gwen was frightened of Carnage, her powers were unstable and unpredictable. The good news is though, Carnage when bonded with Gwen basically didn't need to eat humans anymore for some reason, so yay! And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Carnage lists as we prepare for this movie, which is coming out at the end of the month, at the beginning of October, I am so excited! Be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. And let us know in the comments if you're excited about Let There Be Carnage. I'm excited. I have faith in Woody Harrelson, so I'm pretty excited about it. Number 7. Superior Carnage. This version of Carnage came about when the symbiote was forcefully separated from a currently brain-dead Cletus Kasady by the Wizard. The symbiote refused to surrender to the Wizard's will, and so he had to remove the symbiote via blood transfusion, giving the blood to another unwilling participant, his ally Dr. Carlin Malice. Dr. Malice then became Carnage against his own wishes and became Wizard's loyal pet of sorts, making the Wizard's new Frightful Four pretty powerful, which of course is what he intended. That is of course until he lost control of Carnage, who ended up bonding with the Wizard instead, which also the Wizard was not down for, but that's how Carnage do sometimes. In the end, Superior Carnage would end up returning to Cletus once more, who was thought of as dead at this point, but it was revealed that he actually had survived an explosion that he was in, but was just really badly burnt. Because Cletus Kasady is pretty much impossible to kill, apparently. Even when he's dead, he's probably not dead. Number 6. Red Goblin. Red Goblin might not have additional powers like some of the other alternates on this list, but he does add additional psychopathic tendencies, not that Carnage needed any more of those, and smarts. Red Goblin is what you get when you put 2 of Spider-Man's main arch nemeses, Norman Osborn and Carnage, together, and boy is he really ruthless. This gave us a version of the symbiote who almost got Peter Parker to quit being Spider-Man in order to protect his loved ones against Red Goblin. Red Goblin basically threatened to devour said allies and family members of Peter if he did not revoke the Spider-Man mantle, and if you can believe it, Peter agreed. However, Peter did not stop fighting, he just did so not as Spider-Man but instead as Peter. So he was like, I'm not gonna do it. And everyone was like, oh! And then the next issue he was like, I'm gonna do it as Peter, it's fine. Though of course, even as Peter Parker, he still had superpowers and he called in backup to help. I think he just wasn't wearing his mask. He may have even still been wearing his Spider-Man suit. I mean, with someone like Red Goblin, you're also gonna need all that help, so it's probably good that he called in the cavalry, if you will. Norman's time as Red Goblin ended up driving him even more crazy, and in the end left Norman thinking he was actually Cletus Kasady for a while. I think he's back to normal now. Pretty sure he's back to normal now. I mean, normal. What is normal for Norman? Number 5 is Spider-Carnage Earth 616. While in the animated Spider-Man series we had a character who also went by this name, in the comics it was a different host entirely who went as Spider-Carnage, Ben Reilly. Spider-Carnage was the name that the symbiote took when it bonded with Ben Reilly after temporarily being bonded to John Jameson. However, this was all just a ruse. The symbiote didn't really want to actually be attached to Jameson, but instead wanted to find a host worthy of it. As soon as it seemed Ben was defeating John as Carnage, the symbiote jumped onto him. Even though John was trying to warn him, he's like, don't fight me, it's a trap. Ben Reilly tried to resist but failed and temporarily became the now superpowered and symbiotic character known as Spider-Carnage. This all went down in Amazing Spider-Man issue 410 of the original volume. However, this was the peak of 90s Spider-Man, so you'd have to move over to the just Spider-Man series to continue his story, because that's how it was back then. There were so many Spider-Man comics. They were like, read this issue, then read this other series, then read the other series, and you were like, what's happening? Number 4, Bizarnage. Bizarnage is the amalgam version of Carnage who is seemingly combined with Bizarro in this universe. Bizarnage is Project Cadmus's attempt to recreate alien DNA. Sound familiar? Unfortunately, it didn't go as smoothly as planned, and instead they ended up creating the crystalline monster known as Bizarnage. Bizarnage possesses the powers of Carnage vs. 616 and can bond with other beings. It also is quite adept at evading attacks and possesses hyper intelligence. Bizarnage is a foe of Spider-Boy, himself a combination of Spider-Man and Superboy. Spider-Man from Marvel, Superboy from DC. Number 3, Carnage, Earth 20143. This alternate version of Carnage gave Spider-Man some massive trouble back in 2019 Spider-Verse in issue number 2. She also happened to act as Spider-Man's evil alter ego, as she herself, instead of becoming an alternate version of Spider-Man, became an alternate version of villain Carnage. Ooh. Carnage of Earth 20143 is also an alternate version of Aunt May. Instead of just being a kind, charitable, sweet, yet no-nonsense caregiver or hero, she becomes instead a ruthless and heartless villain who believed free will did not exist and aimed to destroy all of her counterparts throughout the multiverse, as well as the counterparts of her allies. She fought alongside likewise evil yet non-super versions of her nephew Peter and her husband Ben, as well as an evil version of Miles Morales from her reality, who is still Miles Morales, so I believe he still had powers. Spider-Man had to harness the power of all of her superpowered alternates using the power of love from across the multiverse in order to defeat this Carnage. It was pretty intense, and we got to see a lot of alternate, I guess, Spider-Mams. There's like a Spider-Gwen, there's like a Venom, it's crazy. Number 2, Spider-Carnage Animated. Definitely one of the most horrifying versions of Carnage out there as well. This version of Carnage comes to us from Spider-Man the Animated Series from the 90s. He is an alternate reality version of Peter Parker who lost both his Aunt May and his Uncle Ben, oh no, causing him to go to a very, very dark place. In his own reality, he would later bond with Carnage, who had entered his Earth through an interdimensional portal. Due to all the tragedy that he'd suffered, Peter, as Spider-Carnage, became corrupted and set out to destroy all of reality. Once foiled, he headed to another reality to try again, but this time was redeemed by the main animated continuity Spider-Man, who teamed up with a still-alive alternate reality version of Uncle Ben. Together they were able to reach out, reawaken, and remind Spider-Carnage of the goodness still inside him. Unable to rid himself of the symbiote, however, Spider-Carnage opted to sacrifice himself in order to ensure everyone's safety. Number 1, Carnage Cosmic. In the reality verse 616, Norrin Radd ended up coming into contact with the Carnage symbiote, who bonded to him, abandoning his host Cletus Kasady. But in Marvel's What If Volume 2, issue 108, it all goes down a little bit differently. Instead of the symbiote returning to Cletus, in this What If reality of Earth 985, Carnage remained bonded to the Silver Surfer, permanently becoming the Carnage Cosmic. Sort of permanently anyways. So not only does this version of Carnage have all the power it usually possesses as a symbiote and child of Venom, but it also has access to the Silver Surfer's power cosmic as well. Of course, in the end, this version of Carnage is defeated, but only one Silver Surfer manages to regain some control long enough to fly himself and the symbiote, now permanently bonded with him, into the sun. Cry a little tear for Carnage Cosmic.
Number 10,
SCORN. While SCORN itself isn't inherently scary and is more of an offspring of Carnage, it is still also a part of the symbiote who has led its host to do some pretty frightening things. Tanis Knives' prosthetic arm was made by Michael Hall, who had managed to capture the Carnage symbiote. Experimenting on it, he used parts of the symbiote in his designs for prosthetic limbs, which means that Tanis Knives' arm ended up giving birth to a baby Carnage that is part symbiote, part tech, which we later called SCORN. Before Tanis really embraced her symbiote, though, the SCORN symbiote used Tanis to help free the original symbiote of Carnage, who was then able to make its way back to its main squeeze, Cletus Kasady. Bonded together again, Carnage was once again ready to wreak havoc, all because of SCORN and Tanis. Pretty terrifying that her symbiote made her do that. Number 9. Ultimate Carnage. Like the Ultimate Venom, the ultimate version of Carnage was also made in a lab when combining the DNA of Peter Parker and Kurt Connors with some of the Venom symbiote. This version of Carnage quickly grew to become a little monster who had the need to consume human beings in order to stay alive. It used memories of Peter Parker's to return to his home and ended up meeting Gwen Stacy there, whom it then killed. This version of the Carnage symbiote also kind of lived on in Gwen after she was cloned, using part of the symbiote and her own DNA to bring her back, giving us kind of like a weird version of Gwen who is also kind of Carnage. Number 8. 92-niverse. While you wouldn't necessarily think a version of Carnage from a kid's cartoon could be scary, I'm sure there are some who found Carnage terrifying when they watched this cartoon as a kid. We call this universe the Earth of 92131, or the 92-niverse, because it houses both the reality belonging to the X-Men 90s cartoon as well as the Spider-Man 90s series. And X-Men started airing in 1992. In this universe, we are introduced to Cletus while he is holding up an entire police department, proving just how dangerous he is in this animated reality. During his first run-in with Spider-Man, after Cletus has now bonded with the Carnage symbiote and is working with Venom, he takes on and defeats both Spidey and War Machine. And he actually would have even killed Spider-Man if not for Venom stepping in and stopping him. Number 7. 1602 Carnage. The Carnage of Neil Gaiman's 1602 was Cletus Kasady, who was also known as the leader of the Sinister Sextet. A frightening thing to think about, a version of the Sinister Six where Carnage is the leader. Ugh. Sounds like a really crazy version of them. This version of Carnage claimed it got its powers from a demon, though being that it was 1602, it is possible that Cletus just thought the strange being we know as a symbiote must be a demon, because, I mean, what else could it be? Aliens, space travel? We didn't know about that stuff in 1602. Number 6. Cosmic Carnage. This version of Carnage is from when Carnage actually was bonded with the Silver Surfer, and in the What If series Volume 2 of issue 108, Carnage finds himself stuck on the Silver Surfer. In this reality, Spider-Man and the Avengers tried to split Carnage from the Silver Surfer, but they failed. This symbiote seems hell-bent on holding onto the power cosmic, and getting revenge on the Silver Surfer as well. And actually, Carnage being bonded to the Silver Surfer as long as it had meant that it had manifested Norrin cosmic powers itself. So even if it had separated, it would still probably have the power cosmic. In the end, the only way for this frighteningly powerful version of Carnage to be defeated was by having Silver Surfer fly into the sun, sacrificing himself so that the Carnage symbiote would forever be destroyed. Number 5. Crossover Carnage. This version of Carnage appears in the crossover comic Spider-Man and Batman, whose story exists in the crossover universe of Earth 7642. This version of Cletus has a similar backstory to his 616 counterpart, except that he finds himself cured of his homicidal insanity by Cassandra Breyer. At least, temporarily cured, shall we say. Breyer uses technology to implant a chip to cure Kasady, but the Carnage symbiote, of course, residing within him, finds a way to disable that chip. When Cletus ends up in Gotham with the other famously cured villain, Joker, he uses the symbiote to also disable Joker's chip, so the two of them can team up. That's a terrifying idea. This version of Carnage also comes close to killing Batman, who is only saved because, of course, Joker can't seem to let bats die, and he threatens to gas all of them to death, which causes Carnage to panic and attempt to escape, giving Batman the window that he needs to defeat Carnage. Number 4. Superior Carnage. This version of Carnage was meant to be one of the members of the Frightful Four. It was created by the bonding of Carl Malice and the Carnage symbiote, and then later on, the Wizard and the Carnage symbiote. The Wizard's original plan was to use mind control to convince the Carnage symbiote to do its bidding, which would have been a great idea if Carnage's usual host, Cletus Kasady, hadn't just basically found himself in a lobotomized state. So there wasn't much there to control at the time, if you know what I mean. In the end, Malice is the one who ends up being forced into having the symbiote merge with him via a blood transfusion, which is not something that he's super interested in, but it happens anyways. This creates a terrifying new version of the symbiote who seems to love guns and is loyal and obedient, thanks to the Wizard's hold on his mind. For a while anyways. Eventually the Wizard does lose control of Carnage, who ends up leaving Malice, eating his body, and bonding with the Wizard. Number 3, CARLA UNGER. Nothing like a mad scientist story gone wrong. Well, I don't think CARLA was originally a mad scientist, but she was definitely a scientist, and she was definitely driven mad by Carnage. CARLA was one of the many scientists studying neutered pieces of the Carnage symbiote following the events of Superior Carnage, except that the piece she was studying doesn't appear to be as docile as was promised. It leaps through her microscope and into her eye while she's studying it. Upon arriving home after her day of work, the hatred that she feels towards her abusive husband pumps up the piece of symbiote within her, activating it and allowing it to take hold of her, basically breathing life back into Carnage. This symbiote helps CARLA to get revenge on her abusive husband by killing him, before eating her from the inside out. Not as good. And hopping from host to host in an attempt, of course, to get back to its favorite host, Cletus Kasady. Number 2, Zombie Carnage. Elsa Bloodstone ends up running into the zombified version of Carnage, or what's left of it, in Volume 2 of Marvel Zombies, issue number 2, out of 2015. Her and the kid she is traveling with, whom she calls Shut Up, end up on a trap that Carnage has laid out, known as a scab web. This version of the villain has been reduced to just the upper torso, and appears to be covered in little blood blisters. It finds itself defeated after its head is ripped off and is used as a projectile by Elsa, and its body, or scab web, is unleashed but then subsequently set on fire by a man who appears to be Ranger Warren Worthington, but is actually Zombie Mystique in disguise. Spoiler alert. I really hoped it was Angel too. I really wanted it to be Angel. Just flying around, surviving somehow. In this version anyways. In Marvel Zombies 1, he definitely did. Number 1, Aunt May. What could be scarier than any of these versions of Carnage? How about the idea of twisting usually kind and elderly Aunt May into a monster by making her Carnage? Yep, that is what happened in the most recent volume, Volume 3 of the Spider-Verse in issue number 2. There, Spider-Man, Earth 3123's Aunt May, and Miles Morales of Ultimate Universe 1610 must team up to take on the alternate Aunt May version of Carnage. Carnage Aunt May and her Earth's Peter Parker and Uncle Ben work together to try to murder their other counterparts in the multiverse, as they believe the existence of the multiverse proves that basically nothing really matters. They are a force of chaos and death, and this version of Carnage is so deadly that she actually proves to be too much for both Miles and Spider-Man, who are working together. To beat this alternate Carnage back, Spider-Man actually needs the help of various alternate versions across the multiverse. I definitely thought she was gonna die. I was like, no, is this how Spider-Man goes? No!
Number 10, Deadpool. We'll kick this list off on a messy, red, bloody good note. Two red guys slashing each other up, both are kind of insane. Let's talk about it. Deadpool vs. Carnage 2014. Right, so after Cletus Kasady escaped a prison, the merc with a mouth was the only one crazy enough to track him down. In order to track down a maniac, you kind of low-key have to be one. You gotta think like them, right? Wade thinks he can figure him out, and he also thinks that a rocket launcher can take down Carnage. Kind of a fool if you ask me. I mean, in all fairness, fire and sound waves, they work, but it's Carnage we're talking about, a little bit stronger than our Venom guy. Wade gets a closer look, and although he likes guns, swords, and the occasional weed whacker, he thinks one of his grenades ought to do something. One of the many that he has hidden in crevices and places that we don't talk about. And it does, for a page. Carnage lays there, sans head for a moment or two, but backup arrives in the form of Shriek. Deadpool then gets his ass handed to him, and Wade gets impaled over and over and over again, with the last hit practically being the size of a tree just going through his body. Horrible. And then in the end, Deadpool needed a symbiote upgrade himself just to keep the fight fair. Number 9. Spider-Man. Of course we have to talk about Spider-Man getting his ass whooped as well. It's no surprise that Peter is on the top of Carnage's naughty list, and in Carnage It's a Wonderful Life, Dr. Kafka and Security Chief Jameson get a glimpse inside Carnage's mind, and it's literally just a room full of Spider-Man being tortured. That's all he thinks about, just different versions of him being tortured in different horrible ways. I think about like candy corn and stuff, I don't know, I guess I'm normal. The guy's twisted, even in his head his actions are brutal, but daydreaming aside, when Carnage does get his real life hands on Spider-Man, it's so much worse. The Ultimate Comics introduced Carnage in Ultimate Spider-Man 61, and just one issue later Carnage figured out the best way to hurt Spider-Man was to attack his heart, like Willem Dafoe yelled in the first Spider-Man movie. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up just to get some good spirits involved, you know, get it kind of out of the grim, dark tone that we're sticking with for most of this, that would be great. It helps our studio out quite a bit. You guys are awesome. Let's get right back to this list. Number 8. Man-Wolf. In Volume 2 of Carnage, Issue 2, Special Agent Claire Dixon of the FBI assembled this task force to try and hopefully put an end to Carnage's madness. She has Eddie Brock to help out, but this time around he's the host of the Toxin Symbiote, and together they use a woman named Manuela Calderon as bait to bring out Cletus. See, she was the only survivor from his last rendezvous, and by rendezvous I mean massacre. Honestly, I wouldn't agree to that. Kudos to her, it's pretty brave. So she lured him into a mine shaft and then successfully cornered and trapped Carnage. Now what? The task force is also trapped in there with a man named John Jameson, but John's not around at the moment. No, instead Cletus now has to deal with the Man-Wolf. Must have been a full moon tonight. A lot of fur, a lot of blood laying around after this one. They're just throwing each other around this mine shaft. It's pretty grim. They're smashing their heads into rocks. It's kind of cool. The fact that it's a werewolf fighting Carnage, I mean, you either love it or you don't. Things suddenly take a turn when Carnage grabs that gemstone around John's neck, the stone that allows him to become Man-Wolf in the first place, and after that he turns back into a regular naked dude. He's dizzy, he's exhausted, and he's in, of course, immense pain. He lost his footing and then after fell from a cliff. He was so close to taking him down, but you know, had to go turn into a wolf. Classic. Did you know Jupiter has 52 moons? If you were a werewolf on Jupiter, you'd be so busy. Number 7. Silver Surfer. In the Amazing Spider-Man issue 430, once again Cletus was running around the city just attacking bystanders, throwing desks, giving people a finger, just anything horrible, being the worst ever. Luckily, the Silver Surfer was in the cosmic neighborhood and got to offer a helping silver hand to Spider-Man. The symbiote sees the Silver Surfer and it's intrigued, so much so that it leaves Cletus naked again on the street in order to bond with Silver Surfer. He sees all that power and he's like, I'll take some of that please. He then becomes Carnage Cosmic, and I gotta admit he looks pretty sweet. In terms of hosts, that's a pretty high bar to set right there. Silver Surfer ended up handling him, you know, getting him out, but honestly I'm kind of disappointed. Carnage on a surfboard, it's pretty intriguing, sign me up. Number 6. Ghost Rider. Alejandra Jones first appeared in Marvel Comics in Ghost Rider Volume 7. She was sold as a child and ended up in Nicaragua, where she trained in a temple to solely become the next Ghost Rider. When absolute carnage goes down, she's trying to now protect her village, but things get crazy when Carnage rips out her spine and then eats it. Now normally that would be the end of it, like that's enough to be, you know, considered a beatdown, an awful beatdown. And for Jones that was the end of it, but when Carnage ate that spirit spine, he now obtained the spirit of vengeance temporarily, which is just ultimate madness. I kind of like the way he looks though. I mean, you know, completely evil and spine eating aside, I like it. Number 5, the Mercury team. The more fighters we have, the better chance we have, right? When the US Army put together a task force called the Mercury Team, they thought they had a chance because each member was a soldier from a unique military branch. And also, they each got to use a symbiote for select missions. That ought to help out a little bit. Like say when Carnage is loose in Colorado, time to call these guys in. The 4 symbiotes they use are Lasher, Phage, Agony, and Riot. And yes, they also have a symbiote attack dog, which is just amazing. Still cute. Goopy, but cute. When they aren't being manned, they're to remain on ice, just waiting to be used again. They sound like the only chance to win here, but when Carnage finds their secret base first, with all those frozen suits and symbiotes, well, what's the point after that? This was the last we see of the team, obviously, but those 4 symbiotes bonding with Wade, you gotta admit, that's a pretty great deal. Number 4, Nova. One day you're skateboarding, looking for your missing father, and then all of a sudden you fall off your board and wake up to Rocket Raccoon and Gamora. You know, those classic days. Yep, the duo wake him up and say they're also looking for his father and his black Nova helmet. So now this kid takes up the Nova title, works with the Avengers, the New Warriors, and the Champions, completely stepped up to bat. He was 15 only, kid was killing it. And in the Avengers X-Men Axis storyline, our heroes and villains switch sides. Their moral compass completely flips So afterwards, when Carnage goes back to psycho mode, he needs to now soak up more evil. He's got to make up and remind himself who he is. So he goes to Sam's school and then makes a mess there. Horrible. Those poor kids. Those poor kids. Nova fights him off, but the fight is more of a tie than anything. They just both kind of do this. Nova's not, and he's not looking too good here. Number 3, Venom. Okay, we're finally seeing Venom and Carnage go at it on the big screen next month. Hopefully, I'm fully convinced Woody Harrelson is going to steal the show. I'm so excited. But how will the fight end? In the comics, Venom and Carnage have had some serious blowouts. Will Venom eat Carnage like a midnight snack? Will Spider-Man have to come in and take Venom's side, singing Strangers in the Night, of course, while they do it? The beatdowns go back and forth for Venom and Carnage for the most part, but one of the best storylines for me was, of course, Absolute Carnage. Carnage's connection to Null makes him this godly version of himself. Eddie gets beat so hard in the first issue that Venom is the one to suggest leaving. He's like, hey, I can fix you, but we have to leave like now, like ASAP Rocky, we gotta go. Number 2, Miles, Human Torch, and more. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 7099, we see Red Goblin on the cover. The lovely combo comes to life when Osborn gets his hands on the Carnage symbiote. In their first battle, Spider-Man lost, but afterwards Peter called forward some help, some backup. He had the assistance this time around of Miles Morales, Human Torch, Clash, and Silk. Usually the Human Torch would be enough to get some damage done, but with both villains now with their powers combined for Red Goblin, it was much harder. It was almost useless to blast fire at him. They all got their butts handed to them. Nobody was prepared for this level of power. But luckily, Anti-Venom came in to throw some hands back because Red Goblin was seconds away from finishing all of them off. Even after Flash had healed them, they didn't spring back up and start kicking people in the neck again. They were down for the count. It wasn't looking good. They were no longer a formidable team at all. And finally, number 1, the Avengers. Speaking of teams getting their ass kicked, somebody as big and as bad as Carnage, who else to call but Earth's mightiest? In Carnage USA, Carnage has the ability to create clones of himself. Now he can use multiple hosts and he takes over a town at one point. It's really stressful. The team heads to the town to figure out a solution, so we got Spider-Man, Cap, Logan, The Thing, and Hawkeye. Everybody ends up getting the symbiote treatment, resulting in one of the coolest but scariest situations ever. Spider-Man tried to warn the team, but they did their Avengers thing and rushed in as a group to kick some ass. Oops, everybody gets hit except for, you guessed it, Spider-Man. So now it's up to Peter to save the entire team of Avengers in Carnage USA. What a ride, you must check it out. Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Ben Reilly. Created by Peter Parker's DNA, Ben Reilly is a Spider-Man clone created by the Jackal. He first appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 149. Issue 410 shows us a much different version of Ben though. Carnage makes his way to this underground club. It's pretty fun, it's jazzy, everybody's dressed like a supervillain, so naturally everybody loves Carnage. They're like, wow, cool outfit, love the claws, very realistic, we love it. Ben and Carnage fight it out, they throw each other through walls, all that good stuff, but when Ben gets too close, the symbiote decides to move over to the sticky side. Number 9, Scarlet Spider. During Minimum Carnage, Cletus Kasady had returned to try and steal something from a NASA research center, but Scarlet Spider Kane Parker was there to save the day. He hasn't seen Carnage in years, but now he is ready. Mid-monologue, Kane leaps over and breaks Carnage's neck. He just turns it all the way around, just a 180. Bad times. Now of course this does absolutely nothing as Carnage turns his head right back and freaks out Kane, rightfully so, and then he stabs him with one of his tendrils. Carnage escapes using a Prometheus pit with Kane swearing that he's going to kill Carnage for what he's done. Are you sure about that, Kane? He kinda just got stabbed with a tendril, so I don't know. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up on the video, it does help us quite a bit. You're awesome. Thank you so much for your support. Now, before wasting any more time, let's get right back into this list. Number 8, Gwen Stacy. She first appeared in Ultimate Spider-Man 14. She's the daughter of Captain John Stacy, and her and Peter get close when Gwen straight up pulls a knife on a classmate who was bullying Parker. She's pretty wild in the Ultimates, as are most of our characters. She's pretty conflicted as well. I mean, her mother ran off with this random dude. She feels totally depressed because of it, and would stop by Peter's house to talk, vent, talk things out. Her father died when he was killed by a burglar dressed as Spider-Man, so she lives with Peter and May now. It actually causes Peter and MJ to break up temporarily. It's kind of a little romantic rift. A little bit of a love triangle, a lot of drama going on in that household. Very Big Brother vibes. But she learned eventually that Peter was Spider-Man, and she was upset, but she understood, even making peace with MJ along the way. So things are going fine. And after all that pain and agony and stress, later that night, after telling MJ not to worry about them, she was then killed by Carnage, who was looking for Peter. Peter felt bad here, obviously, because he had allowed Connors to use his genetic material to experiment on in the first place. If you know Peter Parker, you're pretty much doomed, so if you see anyone doing any of this, just don't be friends with them. Number 7, Iron Man. Carnage 2010 issue 1 kicks off with Tony getting flipped off at a medical supply expo by Michael Hall. He's showing off a prosthetic arm that is controlled by a chip in his mind, so he's having an annoying start to the night, you could say that. But then he sees Doppelganger chasing an armored truck and sedan. This guy never gets a break. Okay, cut to issue 3, he faces an even crazier webbed monster. So Spider-Man volunteers to go after Carnage first, claiming that he at least knows the symbiote, but on the other hand, Tony is literally a walking tank. So Carnage grows wings and flies off. He doesn't even swing yet. But then he finds a window and attacks Carnage, and in the final issue, he pulls out the big guns, literally pulls out everything he has. Even with the added ammunition, Iron Man is getting slammed down over and over and over again. His suit is at 35% integrity, even tipping him off that catastrophic failure is imminent. Well, you can't win this time with words, Tony. You just need more guns, apparently. Number 6, Venom. King in Black Venom vs. Carnage. We meet Earth 65's version of Mary Jane, much more of a redhead this time around, you could say. Gwen met MJ in grade 6. They made a band called the Mary Janes, and sometimes Gwen had to skip jam sessions to go and fight the lizard. So MJ felt sad. She felt like her best friend was bailing on this dream of being a famous band and touring the world. Their friendship is really put to the test when Null took over MJ and was named after the last Psycho, Carnage. She was made into a literal monster, and her only goal was to get the symbiote from Gwen and then take it back for Null to study. Carnage is great this time around. I mean, MJ turns an electric guitar into a battle axe. It's fun. The action looks beautiful. I could watch these two fight for hours. Things take a turn when Gwen comes face to face with Null himself. Carnage continues to overpower Venom, even leaving unscathed. Gwen and Carnage meet up once again, but it's at Madison Square Garden this time around, because Carnage is now making her own band. It takes a rock off in order to free MJ, but the first couple of fights here easily go to MJ's Carnage. Number 5, Scorn. Scorn first appeared in Carnage issue 5. Michael Hall used the symbiote, combined it with technology, so now you can create and control limbs, like the guy I mentioned earlier. Sounds pretty remarkable. Amputees had a solution now, which is awesome, but the solution was the Carnage symbiote in a way, so of course it all went south. The symbiote escaped its containment cell and bonded to Tanis Neves and used her to rescue Cletus Kasady. But that symbiote was taken from Shriek, so when Knives was close to Shriek, she reached out and a new symbiote was born. Hashtag Scorn. Scorn linked up with the Mercury team in Carnage USA to stop Carnage from taking over a town in Colorado. I mentioned that story in part 1 of this list. But in Web of Venom, Carnage Born, Scorn and its host became a cult leader, dedicating their time to retrieving the corpse of Cletus Kasady, who the cult viewed as Null's prophet or whatever. Scorn resurrected Carnage with a sample of the symbiote, and as soon as he arrived, Scorn was, well, he was no longer needed at that point, which is sad, but that's the harsh reality of it. That's why you don't become a villain, guys. It's just, you're gonna get used. Number 4, Agent Anti-Venom. Go Down Swinging was written by Dan Slott. It's a 4-part storyline that kicks off with Norman Osborn finding a new power. Yeah, he finds the Carnage symbiote, well, steals it rather, from an abandoned S.H.I.E.L.D. warehouse, and when it bonds with Norman, the agenda of course changes. Now he's the Red Goblin, and now he wants to do nothing else but kill. So Flash Thompson, Anti-Venom, rescues J. Jonah Jameson from being kidnapped, and when Peter goes head to head with the Goblin, he wins. Yeah, surprisingly, he even says some last words as well. He thanks Peter for pushing him this entire time, being the drive that he needed, because a man is only as good as his enemies. Okay, interesting. Peter won. This is great. We can start clapping, I think, yeah? Peter says he wished he could have saved Norman, and then he starts to laugh. Yeah, Norman starts to laugh, his blood starts to move around as well. This is all just a lie, it's all a bit. Red Goblin is born. Basically, you got Carnage now with pumpkin bobs. It's pretty messy and terrifying. Anti-Venom was forced to save his friends or kill the Goblin, so he died a hero. His suit was barely attached anymore at that point, but Flash still stuck by Peter's side until the last moment. Number 3, Miles Morales. In Absolute Carnage, Eddie and Dylan are trying to lay low, but Carnage pushing them in front of a train changed that vibe up real quick. Carnage is literally seconds away from ending Brock, but that third rail held him off just a touch longer. Eddie knows at this point that Carnage is still alive, that electric shock therapy didn't really do much, but they used that time to get out of there instead of asking questions. Fair. While catching up with Spider-Man trying to think of a plan here, the news show this massive gravesite that was just discovered. So Carnage is trying to find everybody who once was a host for the symbiote in order to obtain their codices. Now this Carnage cult was responsible for the mass graves, and in the next issue, Carnage now has this dark army with him, this horde. He's much more powerful than ever, living in the spire underneath the streets of New York. So comfortable. His rent's probably so high. When Carnage is about to take over the Scorpion, Miles jumps in to save the day, punching Carnage's head right off of his body for a moment, and then he goes and then comes back, but it's still cool. But a moment is all he gets in this fight, as the next page we see Miles fall under Dark Carnage's control. Number 2, Wolverine. In Spider-Man and X-Men issue 3, we see Wolverine go toe-to-toe with Carnage. It's a nice fun 90s crossover. Wolverine is still rocking the bone claws, which is cool, until, you know, Carnage eats them. Carnage likes the taste. I mean, to be fair, it's probably good for you, it's probably healthy. Pages later, Wolverine strikes again, and it's a fun time because Carnage is like, what the hell? I thought I literally just ate those things on your hand. What's going on? Well, Carnage, you now have an unlimited snack. Just keep Logan around and you're all set. And finally, number 1, Captain America and Co. During the Maximum Carnage event in part 11 out of 14, other superheroes team up to try and stop this maniac. We've heard about him just annihilating people for 2 lists now, so yeah, it takes a lot to come in. Captain America, Firestar, Iron Fist, and Deathlock all head to New York City. They're fighting Doppelganger, Shriek, it's pretty amazing. Even Cloak and Dagger get in on this plan in Maximum Carnage. It's a huge event. Everybody ends up losing to Carnage and his gang though. It's wild. So the fighting is more so left to Venom and Spider-Man, but we have to mention the rest of these guys, especially to close out a part 2. They did a lot of the heavy lifting and they got punched in the face quite a bit during this whole story. I think at the end of the day, we just need to avoid Cletus Kasady in any form, in any story. I'll say that.